Our speaker is Rachel Rosen, and the title of her presentation is Let's Talk About Recalibrating Priorities and Focus Areas During Chaotic Times. I get it. Rachel is a seasoned facilitator. She is a DEI practitioner, and that stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And she is the founder of an organization that I'm sure she's going to be talking to you about, the acronym of which is S.P.A.R.K. She believes that everyone's story matters and that intentional conversations are vehicles for change. She has a master's degree from Stanford, very impressive, as well as extensive training in leadership and organizational development. Her approach is grounded in theory, practice, and a commitment to building capacity with integrity. She has supported teams to come together across racial, gender, sexual identity, and cultural differences, engaging in complex conversations about diversity and inclusion, developing employee resource groups, and forming committees in order to create conditions for inclusion and belonging. As a consultant, she partners with organizations and companies committed to learning and addressing the root causes of their diversity and exclusion challenges. Finally, her work sits at the nexus of her professional and personal lives as someone whose wife is African American. She is committed to co-creating a more inclusive future, one conversation at a time, to spark change for the next generation. Let's all give a warm welcome to Rachel Rosen.
Good morning, everyone. It looks like the slides are loading a little bit slowly, but can we see the screen share that says loading? Can everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see that it's loading and we can see you, so yay.
Okay, wonderful. Every day I'm amazed by some of the technology. You know, what worked yesterday is just perfectly is taking very slow today, and I don't know why. It's the same exact internet, it's the same exact everything. So I'm gonna actually try to stop and refresh just to see if that helps. And we'll dig right into the agenda today. And on a logistical front, we'll have the opportunity to engage with Zoom in a number of ways, but just by show of hands, I saw a couple people use their clap icons. Did you all know in the top right-hand corner of your name, there are different things that you can do, like raise your hand or clap or show kind of icons with different things in the menu bottom section of Zoom. There are some reactions. And so I just wanted to point that out. This is an interactive presentation. You're welcome to use the thumbs up and the claps as you can kind of relate or agree or anything throughout our conversation today. So I'm gonna also start by sharing what I call a thought catcher, which is like a note-taking tool. And let me pull this into the chat box so that while the PowerPoint is loading, we can all kind of on the logistical front get this pulled up as well. So in a second, you'll see something called the Launchpad Conversation with Rachel Thought Catcher tool. And this tool is for us in this space only. It's something that I've used with clients and folks that I have as kind of in my community, in the S.P.A.R.K community. And I wanted to give you all the gift of getting to use this as well. And it is just for us. It's a special gift for you all. So let me go ahead and share this in the chat box. Dun, dun, dun. Got it. Get link, copy link. Okay. So now we have, you should be able to pull this up. Is everybody familiar with Google Docs? If you could give a thumbs up if you're pretty familiar with Google Docs. And if Google Docs aren't super familiar, then you can leave your thumbs down. Let me know if you have any trouble opening up that Google Doc as well. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Great to see some of the connections in here. The file is an interactive Google Doc that is something that you can download yourself. So I'm going to show you two different ways you can download it, and I'm going to pull that up right now.
Rachel, it says the file that we need to request permission from you.
Oh, okay, that's so interesting.
If you can pull it down, if you can pull it down as a doc or PDF, you can just throw it in there.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll just do that, and that'll make things even easier because a handful of us aren't familiar with Google Docs, so that'll just be easier to have as a Microsoft Word document. So the first thing that we'll do is the connection around the interactive nature of this conversation is centered on this thought catcher. So it'll be a space for you to catch your thoughts and make connections throughout our time together. And that I will go ahead and drop as a file so that you can pull your Microsoft Word file over. On the logistical front, are there any other kind of logistical questions about how to take a file and download it and or work with Google Docs? Because I can also pull up the screen share for the Google Docs. If there are any other questions, just let me know.
It's working.
Hopefully.
It opened. Thank
Great.
you.
Great. Hopefully it converted to the right format. I'm a format geek, so I hope that the format looks okay. I haven't checked on Microsoft Word, but I'll also just share it looks okay?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and get this party started with our share screen because it looks like the file is loading. Okay. And as you all are downloading and taking a look at that, I just wanted to give an opportunity for you to take a second just to preview and scan that there are several pages, and we're going to get into a lot of information today, and I'm really excited about what's to come in our session today. As questions come up, the first page is a great page to just jot down questions, because I just saw in the chat box that Shannon mentioned that the questions will be shared with me throughout the time, and Kathy will be monitoring them. And so we will have an opportunity to both ask questions at the beginning and the end, and also have the chat box feature for some folks to ask Kathy and Shannon questions. Okay, so if the Google Doc is still not loading, I'm going to go ahead and make another adjustment. One more second. There's always some kind of technology
Rachel, I
challenge.
think everybody can get the doc that you loaded. So I think everybody can just disregard the Google Doc permissions invitation.
Okay. There is, it's so strange because on my side of things, I have a screen over here. That's why I'm looking to the right, and it says that anybody with the link can access it. But I'm going to go ahead and the formatting is a little bit better on the Google Doc. So because I'm a sucker for formatting, let me just make sure that for people who are more comfortable with Google Docs, that we have that as an option really quickly. And
Rachel, if it's the document that you've already shared, it's formatted perfectly.
You think so? Okay. All right. So it says that I'm not sure what is going on. Anyway, it's okay. I think there's something about, for whatever reason, Google Docs has changed their security settings, and it's not allowing for that to be fixed. That is very, very strange. All right, well, we're going to roll with embracing the imperfect way that this is rolling out in this moment. And so we'll just have a second to glance at the thought catcher. And the first question for us in this session today, as I'm getting the PowerPoint loaded, is, given what you heard the topic of today is, and given your context, everyone in this space has a very unique context. I wanted to be able to have space for everybody to share one thing that you're hoping for today, one thing that you're looking forward to, either learning more about, talking more about, or discussing in this session. So if you could hop in the chat box and just also take 30 seconds or so just to think about, what are you looking forward to? What are you hoping for? What's something that you're excited to learn about, talk about, or explore? Take a second to do that.
Okay, nothing's in the chat box yet.
That's all right.
I would bet a lot of people are just dealing with the fact that we're isolated right now, even though things are opening up a bit. and the ability to network, is very difficult right now. You can't really do that in person, and you're having to rely on LinkedIn associations, et cetera. So I think the concern there is, how am I, as a job seeker, especially since we tend to be a little bit more of the fine wine vintage. we're a little bit older than your average, tech worker here. How will that affect me in being able to get that position, because I can't do the networking that is so imperative?
Absolutely.
There are people who said they wanted to learn more about S.P.A.R.K, what that organization is.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Learn what you mean by filters blocking our decisions.
Great. Perfect.
I don't know that this is what you were looking for, but everybody's priorities, I think, have changed somewhat. The job situation, the future of our country, everything, pre-COVID was going in one direction, and now all of a sudden people are more in the survival mode. And so how have our priorities changed? Just because of the reality of the current situation and the fact that nobody knows what the future holds. How in the world do you plan when everything is so up in the air? One says, how to map my past strengths to emerging needs. That's a good one.
Great. Thank you.
I'm sorry, there's more. How to map my past strengths to emerging needs of employers and to stay true to yourself. Learning how to get a job on an equal footing, being female, Hispanic, older, and in engineering.
Thank you. Any others?
Not so far.
Okay.
But one thing about when times are difficult, when jobs are fewer, it seems as though it's the gains in diversity and inclusion they backslide somewhat because there's just fewer opportunities. And so I think that people, for example, if they think that companies are in trouble financially, so they settle for a lower wage. So the gains that minorities and women have maybe been getting over recent years go back down to where they were, because the times have changed. They don't think that they can be as demanding.
Absolutely. I'm curious to hear what you mean by backside. Would you mind saying a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when unemployment is low, so there were lots of jobs, people were coming out of school, women and minorities were they were learning more about salary negotiation. I read a study recently that said, because of there's been so much attention to the fact that women often don't negotiate. That's one of the reasons that we make less money than males, is that we settle for whatever is offered and we don't say we're worth more. But lately there has been more and more education, and so more women have been negotiating salaries, and the gap between what previously underpaid segments of society, the gap has been narrowing. But now that there are going to be perhaps fewer jobs and perhaps lower paying jobs, it could be that people will be afraid to ask for more, to negotiate up, and so the gap will again widen. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's just a hypothesis that it could happen. Does that make sense?
It does. I
That
hear you.
concern?
Okay. hmm Got it. Thank you for sharing. I am thankful that we are having this conversation because it's very complex and it's so context specific. And so everybody is bringing their own lens in this conversation. And I think that's the power of this particular discussion, is that there are ways that we can talk about habits and priorities and setting intentions and navigating chaotic times. And we're all going to have a different experience with this particular conversation. So I invite you all to bring your unique lenses, because you are the expert of your experience. And that's most important about this conversation for me, is that you bring your full self and that you ask the questions that are really on your mind, and that we have time to really unpack them. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts and connections and questions. And we're going to go ahead and get started. It is so strange. This has literally never happened to me. I've facilitated over 100 Zoom sessions, and I've never had this happen where the slide just refuses to load. So I'm at a loss for what to do. You all probably saw the page where it just kept saying loading, and I have tried everything on my end to get it up, but for some reason the same thing just keeps swirling on the screen. So what we'll get to do is, I think it'll come. I have faith that it will work, but we're just gonna get started with more less visual. Oh, yay! Look at that. As soon as I said I had faith, it popped up. Can you all see that? Okay, good. I'm like, goodness gracious, this is, I mean, I'm literally, I feel like I live on Zoom these days, and I've been using so many different features of Zoom. So maybe Zoom is just making me practice my patience. All right, so here we are. I want to start with a quote that is really foundational to my approach and everything that I believe, that I was just basically sharing about, which is a quote by Lila Watson, who's an Australian Indigenous activist. And she says, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." This is a quote that is so true to my approach, in the sense that everything that I do as a consultant, as a strategist, as an executive coach, is really grounded in this belief that people have the capacity to solve their own problems with the right conditions and the right supports. And so I never call myself an expert. I'll never call myself a trainer, because I believe in partnering, and I believe that learning takes two, and it requires investment on both sides. And also, as someone who lives in Austin and someone who's connected to this community and knows Shannon well through the LGBT Chamber of Commerce, I just feel really honored to be here. And I see you all's success as interconnected with the landscape that my wife and I live in Austin. So we already had a chance to go through some of these details. If you want to share, I know we already did some checking in, but if there's anything else that you want to share about how you're doing today, feel free to. I talked about some of the logistics and the icons. There are even more icons. If you click on the participants logo in the menu bar, you can see things that are easy ways to offer some quick responses. And it's at the bottom of the bar when you look at the participants section. There are just some ways to give people nonverbal communication. So you can also try that if that's something that's interesting to you. So who am I? Who is Rachel? What is S.P.A.R.K? I am the founder and CEO of S.P.A.R.K. We're a multi-tiered enterprise committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, just like Kathy said. The core beliefs really guide and drive everything that I do. And I'm particularly excited to be here because S.P.A.R.K has only gotten to where it is, which you're about to hear about, because of the habits and priority systems and all the lessons learned that I've had to really practice over the past 5 years. And we've had the opportunity to facilitate and present for all these different entities. And it continues to be an honor to get the opportunity to be connected to thousands of people in our community. And I put this up here on the right because it all started with an index card. And then after that, it was up to the habits and the systems and me leaning in and failing forward every step of the way. So I just want to start with a couple questions just to gauge where we're at in this conversation. So if you are used to either using the thumbs up or the clap feature, go ahead and use that icon when I ask this question if you can relate to it, if you identify with what I'm asking. So raise your hand if you've ever attended any kind of workshop or session on habits or priority setting, goal setting. Raise your hand or clap or give me a thumbs up if you've attended any kind of learning session on habit development, goal setting, or priorities. Okay, seeing some hands and thumbs. Awesome. Got it. It helps me get a sense of where we're at. Raise your hand if you've been to multiple sessions of these awesome Friday learning sessions with the Launchpad Job Community. If you've been to several events. They used to be in person. I had it on my calendar to be in person. But yeah, give us a thumbs up or a hand raise if you've been to several sessions and this is something you've been a part of for a while. Awesome. Okay, great. And raise your hand if you live in Austin. Give a thumbs up if you're in the Austin area. Right. Raise your hand if you would consider yourself someone that is multi-talented, like you've worked in multiple industries and different spaces. And that could look like you've had jobs in different industries, you've had different types of jobs, you have multiple skill sets, and sometimes that means it can be hard to know which one to zoom in on. Thank you. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like you have so many things to do and your to-do list is just never ending and it can be hard to know where to start. Thank you. I'm seeing the thumbs and the connections. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to dig into a lot of that today, and it's helpful to know where we're at. It seems like we have about half the people raise their hand or give a thumbs up for each question. So it was really good to know, just to get a little pulse check on where we're at. Something that's unique about the S.P.A.R.K approach is what I call the S.P.A.R.K stance. In every session that I do, every event that I facilitate, I always invite everybody in the room to show up fully and authentically. And this is what I call the community agreement, both for my team, but also for the teams, my consulting clients that we work with. So showing up authentically, pausing and listening, asking questions with curiosity, suspending a little bit of like the certainty that sometimes we can feel, I already know that, or I have clarity on that. What's core to the S.P.A.R.K approach is being open to checking our assumptions. The R is respecting diversity, so noticing just the importance of different perspectives, and that breaks down in all numbers of ways, whether it's race, gender, generation, socioeconomic status, physical ability, mental ability, like all the neurodiversity. There's so many things underneath the word diversity, and so I invite us to bring that lens. And lastly, invite some kindness when conflict or tension comes up. If you feel a little bit of discomfort is a part of the growth process. And as a runner, I have been running since like middle school in terms of track and cross country and long distance running. And I know that when my muscles are sore, that's usually a sign that I'm pushing myself to do better. So I invite us to think about that as well. So as a strategist and as a consultant, the biggest pattern I see in professional world, and also as a family member and community member and friend, I see a lot of us, and this happens to me too, right? What I call the intention gap, where we have these intentions to do X, Y, and Z. And then at the end of the day, our intent doesn't match our impact. And there are a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen, but it starts with how we show up and what we say we'll do. And so we're going to dig into that today. And what I do as a coach and a strategist is help people bridge that gap. And today we're going to focus on, so the 5 C's are core to the S.P.A.R.K approach, and we talk about each of the 5 C's for inclusive leadership development. But in this session today, we're really going to zoom in on clarity when it comes to our goals, priorities, and having alignment of what we say is important and what we actually do. The other layers, the other 4 are change management, conflict management, communication with kind of critical consciousness and self-awareness, and then community facilitation. And I always say that leadership requires work from the inside out. So really doing some self-reflection is key, and it's been key for me, but I always haven't had practice at these skill sets. In fact, I can remember a long time ago when I felt scattered all the time, and I had 20 different types of to-do lists and 20 different things that I wanted to do, and it was just hard to figure out how to get all of the things that I cared about in alignment. So there's a core quote that's key to my approach, which is by Brene Brown, which I deeply believe. She says, people are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And I believe that. I think that the intention gap doesn't happen because people are terrible or have bad habits or lack integrity. I think that sometimes if we don't know better, we can't do better. Or if we don't have the tools and the resources and the skill set, sometimes there's a gap. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I want to ask, can you relate to this? And you can give a thumbs up or a hand raise. Sometimes this image actually is one of my favorites because it's blurry, right? And sometimes that's how the world can feel. If we feel scattered and overwhelmed, like we're burning the candle at both ends. I certainly have been there. And I can say right now, there's a compound effect of stress that's happening in our country with the pandemic, coupled with job insecurities that are overwhelming and ever present in a way that's unprecedented. And then on top of that, the things that were causing stress prior to March of 2020 are still there, right? So anybody that had health challenges before then or had family dynamics that were stressful before this pandemic, that was already kind of a baseline that was adding to the scatter and the overwhelm. And so now it's amplified because of the current state of our country. And so if you want to hop in the chat box and just share on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel on the scatter radar and on the overwhelmed radar? And permission to be fully honest, and you don't have no pressure. Everything that I offer is invitational. So if you don't want to share, that's okay. But if you're feeling bold and courageous, feel free to hop in there and just say on a scale of 1, so 1 would be, I don't feel scattered and overwhelmed at all. 5 would be, I feel there's just so much on my plate. The candle is definitely burning at both ends. And there's no wrong or right answer. This is just a little snapshot of your current state. Thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate it. And the honesty, I appreciate the 9 because that's real, right? Sometimes it's like 5 doesn't even capture it. Sometimes when we're in pain, I've been in so much pain when the doctor said, are you in pain? Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm like, it's at a 15. I can't, like, beyond 10. I've never felt anything like this, right? And it is important to know where we're at because it helps us set goals around what's realistic and not, right? So thank you so much for sharing. We're going to just highlight a little bit of change management because it's really important. When we go back to this page, and we're going to do the same thing for this process. So when it comes to change management, we're going to talk about a framework in a second, but it's very similar to the challenges that we experience with clarity, except change management is having the tools to navigate the storm when they come. So for some of us, it might feel like we're drinking water through a fire hose with so many changes. There's so many changes and I can't even see straight because it's just coming at me and I'm thirsty, but I can't even process that this huge fire hose is throwing water at me because it's just too much, right? And this model is William Bridges' model. He has a great book about managing change and transition. It was really formative for me. And if you Google William Bridges and you type in transitions, phases of transitions, this is his cycle. And he talks about every time a change happens, it's usually external. Something happens that causes a change, right? But what ultimately is true is that transitions happen from the inside out. They're psychological, emotional. They involve the stages of grief, and they involve an ending, a neutral zone, and a new beginning. And we all experience change and transition so differently, and it's not as fast as the change process. And so I think it's important to remember that we're all still transitioning from the news of the pandemic, and anyone who's experienced trauma or any type of major stress in the past has a compounded effect to this pandemic because there's already change and transition that are directly connected to how we've experienced stress in the past. And so just to normalize that emotion is a part of this, and it can be very, very overwhelming and really impact our capacity to prioritize and be as productive as we want. So it's actually in the wiring of our brain none of this is personal. There's actually so much in terms of the NeuroLeadership Research that suggests that this is happening internally and on a very real front. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much can you relate to the statement about drinking water through a fire hose and not having the tools to navigate all the changes that are coming at you? And you can think about changes from the pandemic to job stuff, to personal stuff, to other work stuff to any kind of change, major life changes that feel like they're impacting your capacity to navigate this particular change. Great, thank you all. I see people are already hopping in the chat box and sharing. Thank you so much. And again, here's the quote, just in case it's helpful to see it one more time. And the phases of transitions is what we looked at just a second ago. Okay, so we'll keep it moving because this is directly connected to change management. All right, so this, I told you that we were going to explore some of the resources on change management. And this is Kerwin's freeze, change, and refreeze strategy. Okay, so I'm going to look over here at the notes so that I can also make a note to put some of these links in your thought catcher so you can have access to them. But the bottom line is this: in the same phases of transition, there's a ton of research on change management theory as well. So there's William Bridges, there's all sorts of resources out there. But this one in particular is a sticky one. William Bridges and this one really stick because it allows for us to have a visual of kind of the idea of ice, freezing, unfreezing, and then refreezing, right? And so when we're approaching a new change, it can feel like we are, depending on who we are and how we're situated, that we still feel frozen, and it takes a minute to unfreeze, right? It can be kind of scary to say, okay, I'm starting to acknowledge that I want to do this thing. And so the unfreezing process takes time and actually a lot of intentionality to go from frozen, which we sometimes feel at the end in the neutral zone, to unfreezing. It can happen slow for some people and fast for others. And then once we get through the change process, this is when we actually go from unfreezing to a more solid state. And this is, again, context specific, but we have plans, we have action steps, we've got kind of visuals that help remind us to stay on track with our habits. We have mentors, support systems, experts, benchmarks, and we have trainings and support systems that actually help us stay in this fluid space as we're developing new habits. And then the new type of what he calls refreezing is when we actually, so we change states of mind, right? We go from, I'm frozen in this one habit, and I know to change it, I have to unfreeze and develop these new habits so that I can get back into a place that's solid. So refreezing in the new state, I almost think about them in terms of different colored ice cubes. So the red would be, I was frozen in this red state that wasn't helpful for me and it wasn't leading to the results that I wanted to see. So I needed to unfreeze, change habits, and then refreeze back into a blue or a green that feels more aligned with my values. And this is how we develop some integration strategies and really shift not just our behavior, but also the mindsets and the attitudes that we have toward the behavior that we wanted to change. So this is food for thought as a sticky resource and a metaphor, and I'll add it to the thought catcher at the bottom. I'll put the links to the resources that I've referenced. And so how do we do that? How do we go from frozen to unfrozen to change and then to refreezing? How do we actually get back into the state of being that we want to be? I think the biggest pitfall, to be honest, and this was me for a good portion of my life, was thinking that I could do everything all at once. Like I wanted to change 10 habits. And so I imagine myself metaphorically saying like, all 10 of these things I need to do, and I'm going to try to focus on all 10. And the truth is I could only do one at a time. I could only unfreeze, change, and refreeze one jar at a time. And so what has helped me tremendously is really over the past 5 years, dedicating a ton of time to studying habit development. And B. Fogg is one of the leading thought leaders, and I would say the best because I'm biased because he's at Stanford, but truly his work is phenomenal. And he talks about what he calls tiny habits. And he claims that it's very difficult for us to just resolve and start doing something. What we need to do is simplify the action by reducing it down to what he calls a tiny habit. one thing that's easy and quick to do. He says it should be sequenced into some part of our daily routine that already is a habit or something we do without even having to think about it, right? And so he has this quadrant visual that says we need things that we're very motivated to do. So we need to have high motivation, and we need to have easy ability to get started on it. That is really indicative of the degree to which we can sustain the new habits, right? And so if we start with really, really hard things and low motivation, they never sustain themselves because they're either too hard, we don't have the skill sets or the knowledge, or we're not actually motivated. Someone else told us to do the thing. Someone else said, you should try this. Like, I'm sure some of us can relate to like a friend or a family member saying like, oh, you got to try this new diet. It changed my life. And will you do this with me? Or, hey, I really started this exercise routine and I'm going to this gym. Will you come with me? And someone else can be really motivated and excited, but that doesn't mean that we have the same motivation, right? And so this is food for thought. And I want to actually allow us to hear his words because DJ Fogg is so phenomenal. So we're going to this is a 5-minute quick little video clip. I'm going to take my headphones off so that the audio works. 1 second. I've learned that over the years. Okay, so let me know if you can hear this.
The good news
You hear it? Thumbs up?
is that behavior and behavior change is not as complicated as most people think. It's systematic. And there are ways to understand behavior that are pretty straightforward and simple. And I'm going to share some of those with you today. There are 15 ways behaviors can change. They're not hundreds of behavior types. There's 15 ways. When we talk about health behavior change, people are mostly talking about long-term change. And this row, these are the 5 that represent different types of long-term change. I'm not going to go into depth here, but what I want to explain to you is when it comes to long-term change, there's only 2 ways you can get it done. Number 1, you can change your environment. So before, here's your environment, certain behavior, and then after, the changed environment changes your behavior. That's a reliable way. It also includes your social environment, before, after. Now, changing the environment is a reliable way to change your behavior. However, it can be tricky, especially the social environment, families and coworkers and so on. So there's one other way of changing your behavior long-term, and I'll give you a hint. It does not have to do with motivation. Surprise. Motivation actually applies to other kinds of temporary behavior change, but not long-term. In other words, relying primarily on motivation to change your behavior long-term is a losing strategy. And similarly for willpower. So if you can take those off the table if you make the behavior change tiny enough. Now in this grid, this is where habits live, blue path. It's something familiar that you do from now on. And if you make that very tiny, like 2 push-ups, floss 1 tooth, and so on, it's very easy to repeat and make that become a habit. Think about it this way. You already know how to floss all your teeth. That's not what you're lacking. What you're lacking is the automaticity of flossing. So you don't need to train flossing all your teeth. You need to train making it automatic. Now, in the persuasion boot camps that I teach, we geek out about this kind of stuff. And this is one of the crews with me up in the wine country doing it. We look at the sequences of behaviors that eventually land you here to habit. We won't go in that kind of depth today, but what I do want to say, and this is a little bit controversial, is this puzzle is solved. And I'm going to share the pieces with you, and I'm going to share some ways that it got solved. We'll see what you think. That there's a new way to create habits that is reliable and systematic. Now, when we look at health outcomes, bullseye, what do we want to do? Well, things like lose weight, manage stress, and so on. But if you design for the outcomes, you're designing at the wrong place. You need to design for the behaviors that lead to the outcome. And if you take an issue like weight loss, there are many, many behaviors that can contribute to that outcome. Stress reduction, eating better, and so on. And I would propose that most of the behaviors that we need to do are habits. So of the 15 ways behaviors can change, the one that matters most to long-term health are habits. And as we create what I call these tiny habits, and we can't do it all at once, little by little, we will then approach this health outcome in a very reliable way, in a way that doesn't regress, in a way that doesn't make you, oh, I give up, now I'm just gonna go back to how I was. Let me share a personal example, and I hesitated about including this, but I will. In 2010, I got one of these scales that's super high tech, and it can tweet out your weight. Okay, so I set it up, so it's tweeting my weight. So I started tweeting it out in 2010, and this is about a year. So you can see what's going on there. Not much change, up and down, up and down. What I learned was, number one, simply tweeting your weight didn't seem to have any effect on me, and I looked up others who had done it. It didn't seem to have lots of impact. Number two, my Twitter followers hated it, so I stopped. But I kept, I made it a habit of stepping on the scale. It was right there. A few months later, going up. So at one point, I thought, okay, I've been doing this thing called tiny habits. It's something like I've applied elsewhere. Now I'm going to apply it to weight loss because I want to lose some pounds. So after creating many, 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 many tiny habits, this is where I am this week. So that's probably the course of a year or so. You can see no real change. And then putting together little by little these tiny habits that took root and would grow. I believe I've made a long-term change. Now we'll see 5 to 10 years from now, but it seems like these habits will be very hard to undo. So I put this out there. When you know how to create tiny habits, you can change your behavior and your life.
All right. Thank you. So feel free to hop in the chat box and just share a word or a phrase that you think as you reflect on the impact of his approach. Like what stood out to you? What resonated? What did it make you think of? Take about 30 seconds just to kind of think about it and then type something into the chat box. Okay. Yes, behaviors are habits, and starting small is the only way to sustain things, which is really counter to what we hear. And so we're going to start small, but think big in just a second. And we're going to talk about some of the importance of integrating and aligning our vision for where we want to be, the impact we want to have, the values that are going to help guide us, and then ultimately the systems we want to improve and the behaviors. Right on. Yeah, exactly, David. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Like you cannot, same thing. I always say you can only climb one mountain at a time. You can only jump one ditch at a time. However you want to think about it. It is the way that it's counter to all this information that's kind of like the fire hose. I feel like media and all the different things that where it's almost like TMI all the time with all the information that's coming at us. And so, Anna, are you, I just want to double check. Can everybody hear me? Because I just saw that you can't hear. I want to make sure that other people can hear me. Okay. Okay, maybe check the audio settings. Sorry, it seems like everybody else is okay, so we'll keep going, but let me know if you need some support. Maybe Kathy or Shannon or Anna, reach out to the systems and we'll figure that out. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's scroll down in your thought catcher into page 2. So the first page was for you to capture any thoughts, reactions, what resonates from the session so far. And now we're really getting into the note taker. So if you're on page 2 with me, and by the way, the Google Doc finally works. So if you scroll up, you can see, I think all at once, Google decided to be my friend. You can see, you can have access to the formatting that is on the way that it was supposed to look if you click on the Google link at the beginning. And we're gonna take 60 seconds, okay, per line. So this activity is going to take 4 minutes total. And I'm going to put a timer on, and this is called rapid prototyping, rapid brainstorming. I have a design thinking, human-centered design approach. And so I believe that when we have time-bound opportunities to brainstorm, something gets unleashed in our brains when we don't feel the pressure of having the forever conversation with ourselves. So I'm going to put 60 seconds on the clock, and you're just going to write the first thing that comes to your mind when it comes to the vision that you have. Where do you want to be 1 year from now? Maybe even 6 months from now? What do you see your future looking like? How do you want to see, what do you want to see more of and less of? And be as specific as possible, okay? So you're going to type that in to your chart on page 2 of the section that says aligning intention with impact. And so you can type it in. Great, Anna, glad to hear we're all better. You can just type directly into your version of the copy. So if you're in Google Docs with me, just make sure to go to File, Make a Copy, so you can make your own notes and type it directly in there. And the timer is going to start here in 1 second. So go ahead and pull your paper up. And if you're taking notes on your own notepad, all good. Wherever you want to write this down, just go for it. And we'll get started right now. And when you hear the timer stop, that just means to gently put a pin in wherever you're at, and we'll keep it moving. Please begin.
Okay, so that's our gentle reminder that the timer's up. So feel free to finish your thought, and you can always come back to this. That's the power of this exercise, is it really is just designed to prime the pump. All right, we're going to take 60 more seconds, and we're going to hop over to the impact column. So I want you to, it's like 2 buns and a sandwich, if you will. And so you're going to go to the impact and think about, what's the change that I really want to make in the world? And you can be as broad or specific regarding the impact you want to make. What do you want? Your legacy would be a really broad, big picture impact, and then specific, like, what's the thing that I want to see improve by the end of June? Like, what's the impact that I want this vision to have in my life, right? Okay, so take a minute, and the timer starts now. Okay, now we're going to go to the values column. So the values are for us to think about. They're our filter, and this gets clearer with time and focus. But the first thing I want you to think about is, what do you stand for and what do you stand against? Sometimes that helps us get clear on our core values. How do you filter your decisions? Is it like, some people, family is a core value. And so if it's going to be the best for your family, that might be a filter. Some people, integrity is a core value. Other people, it's inclusion or innovation. It really depends on each person. And if you've never had a chance to reflect on your core values, just take it wherever you want. Just kind of start with what you stand for and against, and it'll get clearer. And if you've done this before and you're crystal clear on your core values, then I invite you to take it a layer deeper and to think about, why is that? And what is the impact of that core value in your life, okay? So we'll take 60 seconds and just, again, stream of consciousness, write whatever comes to the top of your mind. That's our timer, so put a pin in wherever you got. It's okay if you're mid-sentence, because you can come back to wherever you're at. And lastly, the meat of this sandwich is what's going to hold everything together. So this is like the protein. This is what actually sustains the health of this whole activity. So what are the habits, structures, routines, and systems that support you to get things done and accomplish your goals? So you can start with what you currently have, and then think about aspirations. Like, what do you want more of? Who do you admire because they have systems and support and all sorts of structures. So first think about, what do I currently do? Maybe I do a to-do list every day. Maybe I have a Google Calendar that I follow very closely. Maybe I have ongoing meetings with certain people. Maybe I have certain routines. So just think about what's true for you in these next 60 seconds. And then you're welcome to start dreaming as well. If you finish with what you've currently got, then you can add more. All right, go ahead and start. Here's our cue to put a pin in wherever we got and to pause for now, because we're going to come back to this list in just a second. But thank you for first starting that rapid brainstorm, because it really does illuminate a lot about ourselves, and you can come back to it and add to it at any point now. So now when you look at your systems and habits in that third column, there are so many things that you could do to deepen, build, develop, and strengthen some of the systems and the habits, right? So you might have said, like, I have a morning routine or daily self-care practices or morning meditation, evening meditation. Maybe I use these organization and planning systems. I do a daily job search. I have specified time for sending resumes in and following up with applications. You know, there's a lot of different things you could do. Out of what's in your systems list, think about what feels most high priority, high leverage, most impactful, especially as it pertains to the vision that you have for yourself and the impact you want to make. So either put a star next to them or kind of highlight the ones that you think about what's most important. And sometimes to actually filter even more how we make priorities, we can look at this Eisenhower decision matrix, which is one of my favorite, and I literally have it hanging on my wall right in front of me on my desk. And he says, what's important is seldom urgent, and what's urgent is seldom important. But a lot of us, we've convinced ourselves that everything is urgent and everything is important. And I fall into that trap all the time, especially if you're a very heart-centered, passionate person. It can be hard to discern them, right? But his quadrant helps us recognize, okay, in the top left, things that are both urgent or important are really only like crises, deadlines, major deadlines, and big problems that need to be addressed, right? There are things that need to be done now and today. And then you have things that are important but not urgent, which are bigger. This is where we want to spend the bulk of our time prioritizing and chunking time and space for, which is relationships, planning, exercising, calling our friends and family, researching articles, really finding the right fit for the next job, setting a long-term strategy for our business. Yes, okay, let me check the chat box. I just saw a couple notifications. So definitely, thank you, Shannon. I think given the time, if folks are good to go to 11:35 or 11:40, I can be done by 11:40, but I want to make sure we have time and space for questions. So thank you, Shannon, for adjusting the schedule for that. And Karen, here we go, back to the previous slide. What we want to do is think about which of the systems and habits would be game-changing if you strengthen them or did them with more regularity. So for me, categorizing them with the Eisenhower matrix is helpful because it allows me to see, okay, is this really urgent? Is it impacting my health, my happiness, my well-being immediately? Is there something that immediately needs to be addressed in a big way? Second, if it feels important, it will impact my long-term goals. It feels necessary for my growth, but I know I'm going to have to chunk my time and really think about my priorities if I do that. Third would be it's a combination of A and B. And then fourth would be, I'd really like to get to this and maybe somebody told me I should do this, but you know what? It's kind of distracting me from what I really need to do, right? And some of that for me is like social media stuff, like sorting through, organizing my desk and like organizing a closet and things that I'm like, okay, I could do it, but is it really important for me? Is it really urgent? Is it really going to impact my long-term goals? If the answer is no, then maybe I need to go back to column A and B and think about, could I delegate the thing that I kind of want to do? Because unconsciously my brain is saying like, it's easy, it's kind of distracting, just do it, go watch that show and don't do the thing you need to do, right? We all fall in these traps. And if it's not urgent and not important, like some things we can actually delegate as well. So there's this idea of delegating and deleting some things off of our to-do list that's really hard, but the Eisenhower matrix helps us do. And so I want to invite you to now look at your systems and all the things that maybe you said you wanted to do to improve. And it might be in the impact column, it might be in the vision column, it might be in your systems column, but go ahead and highlight the things that you're like, you know what, this is really, really important because it has a ripple effect for everything else. And it might be like, if I don't get my time management system in place and really get a daily schedule down, I'm going to keep falling into this trap of feeling like I'm procrastinating, feeling like I'm not meeting my deadlines, etc. So it's really dependent on each person, what feels most important, and it really depends on what's going on for each of you. And so I want us to now zoom in on one tiny habit, and it's going to be really hard to choose one, but the thing that will help us is choosing the thing we want to stop doing, because it helps us with these tiny habits rather than saying like, I'm going to do a strategic plan for my life. That can feel overwhelming. And so we're going to zoom in and say, you know what, this month, in the month of June, it's great because we're closing out a month right now. In the month of June, I'm going to stop blank, whether it's like checking social media after 8 o'clock or watching Netflix during the weekdays or whatever the thing is, because you see that it's really impacting your ability to do the things that are on your chart, right? And so as you look at your chart and you see, you know what, the thing that's actually getting in the way of me creating the vision that I want and the impact that I want and some of these systems I want to improve, it usually comes down to a couple things that are distracting us. And so I want to invite you to choose one thing to stop and write down in your next chart beneath it why that's important to you. So I'm going to stop, again, like something simple, checking social media during the work hours, or if health is my biggest priority right now, I'm going to stop getting fast food and eating fried foods or junk food for the month of June. Or I'm going to stop, if I notice a pattern that I am not sleeping, and like the things that are getting in the way of my sleep are checking social media or watching scary TV at night, like I'm going to stop doing that, right? Whatever it is that's impacting you in the most urgent and important ways, I want you to identify. Right, thank you, Jennifer. That's a great point, right? There are certain things that really impact our energy. And if we desire to have positive and productive energy, we know what drains us. And so maybe we set a reminder on our phone, like no news until 5 o'clock. If it's really, really urgent and important, someone will let me know, right? And I've had to do that at certain points too. Okay, so then the next is what you will do instead. So to change habits, BJ Fogg suggests that we have to have a replacement habit. There's 0 ways to change habits without 2 things. You have to have a replacement habit, you have to have a reward, and then ideally the bonus 3rd thing is a support system, something to help hold you accountable. Okay, so what are you going to do instead? So Jennifer, great example. If I have a pattern and a habit of watching news in the morning, instead of that, I'm going to put a Post-it on my TV and my computer, like no news till 5 or no news till this, right? When I was trying to I went through a slump because I had an injury and it was really hard for me to get back into running. And so instead of, it was really hard, and exercising, like I like exercising. I know that exercising helps me feel motivated and energized, but I went through a big slump. So I had to, what I told myself, to replace the habit of like eating a little bit too much in the morning and pushing snooze in the morning, I put my running clothes and shoes right there so that when I woke up, I put a note with my running shoes and said, you can do this, you know? So that was my replacement habit to what I had been doing, which was pushing snooze and just justifying not exercising, right? So the little things make a big difference, and get as specific as you can get. So I'm going to put my running shoes right next to my bed. I'm going to put the Post-it on my TV or my computer, and my support system. What's one person you can tell to say, hey, I'm working on this new habit. I need you to help hold me responsible. So ask me once a week, send me a text, right? And anything else you want to say about your replacement habit, and what reward are you going to give yourself for actually following through on that habit? So for me, I have a huge sweet tooth, and I also have like, I love journaling. I'm a writer, and so I could geek out on like journals, books, and like all the different kind of organizational tools and templates and stuff like that. And I also love sweets. And so my rewards usually come down to some kind of office like thing that I can get to upgrade my office, or something really delicious like a fresh brownie from Colleen's Kitchen, or fresh baked cookie, like whatever the thing is. be really specific, because rewards are actually critical for us to get crystal clear on. If I do this, then my reward is going to be this. And they can start small. And this is why I'm going to share here in this next habit tracker. So if you scroll down, you'll see that in that pink section, so after each week, you're going to give yourself a reward that gets bigger and bigger. So the first reward might be, and it could be at the end of each day, like, hey, I did that thing. I'm going to give myself, I've had people do all sorts of things in the programs that I run. Like I had somebody on my team, what was it? She had told her wife to give her $20 if she accomplished her goal at the end of the week, and to take away $20 if she didn't. And so it was this thing that she at the end of the month, she would get $100, but each week she had to really like realize that $20 could be taken if she didn't follow through too. You know, for other people, the reward is something as simple as like, I get to eat out at the end of the week if I cook every day of the week, or I get to, you know, each person's is so specific. So think about the things that really motivate you and keep you going, and could be start with a smaller reward. So like for me, fresh baked cookies is like a special little treat. If I do these things, a bigger one could be like, if I do this for 2 months straight, I'm going to treat myself to a trip to, you know, things have changed a little bit, but I'm going to go on a day trip and go to wine country in the hill country and spend a whole day and allow myself to have that luxury of just like really treating myself, because I earned it, right? Or I'm going to I'm going to save up and get, you know, that X, Y, or Z that I've been really wanting, that purse, that outfit, those shoes, whatever the thing is, whatever keeps you motivated, right? And so this is food for thought for you. Everybody's going to be different, and I want you to track, if you're open to it, see what happens when you track what your results are, because I put up here, what gets measured gets managed. And this is true in all of the things in my coaching, consulting, strategy work, whether it's setting a clear goal for the strategic plan for a company, or whether it's changing a habit around stopping eating junk food. The same skill sets and muscles are required. And if we don't track it and measure it, we can't know for sure what caused the growth. And so this is a tool for you to just say, okay, on day one, I feel highly motivated. Like I'm ready, right? I feel high. I feel good. I feel like high motivation. And then did I do it? What did I do? I did, you know, 2 push-ups today, 3 push-ups the next day, whatever you want to gradually do more of each day. Make sure to track like, hey, this is what I did today. Sometimes we exceed our goal, which is great, but like just being really explicit with yourself about what the goal is really important. And always remembering to go back to what your bigger vision is, where you want to be in 3 months, 6 months, etc. Because every day we're going to have this choice to go backwards to what was comfortable, or to step into a little bit of discomfort and try the new habits. And most importantly, it's critical that we know that we're not alone, because developing habits is really, really, really hard work. And so to be gentle with yourself, to have patience with yourself, regardless of what the habit is something I invite you to do. And so, yeah, that concludes this section of the presentation. And I wanted to make space for questions. And let me go over here to make sure that I put the feedback form for people who have to go early, and then I'll just start answering the questions that pop up in the chat box, okay? So let's go, copy, and the feedback form is here. All right, so Mark says, let me see. How do you define the difference between habit and addiction? Ooh, that's a great question. And I actually do a lot of sessions. I actually facilitate sessions at all different places, and one of them is I facilitate a session with folks at the Travis County Jail, actually. And I'm a volunteer for a program called Truth Be Told. And addiction comes up a lot in the criminal justice system. I do a lot of volunteer in the criminal justice system, so I just made a connection to that. We talk a lot about this, and there are positive and negative habits. There are positive and negative addictions. There are positive, and and I am not an addiction expert. I'll say that. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not someone who holds space for addiction. So I see them as two parallel paths involving similar muscles. However, addiction is more connected. There's some research that suggests that addiction there's some biological and hereditary things that get passed down. So that's the first thing, is that there's more complexity when it comes to addiction and the ways in which extreme habits take off in a negative and positive way. And there are people who say, like, I have an addictive personality, and that means that I really do X, Y, and Z. And so I see that similar to what Walter's saying, it's like an extreme version of habits. It's far beyond habits. They're similar because they involve behaviors, but when it comes to negative addictions, there are things that are beyond habits that get impacted, and they have a ripple effect for family and have an extremely negative impact on like the person who would identify themselves as an addict. There are layers of things that get into the psychology realm that is different from habits themselves. Is that helpful? What is the Google Doc link? Okay, so let me put the thought catcher. The slides are not available, they're copyrighted, but I'm going to, in the bottom section, let me make sure that I put the feedback form in there at the very bottom. And I'm gonna also put links to the different topics that were referenced, including the videos, okay? So the feedback form is here. Okay, so coming back up, Andrew, Google Doc link is in there now. When your friend and family aren't the best people. Yes, that's a really good point. It is such a good point, because the conversation that BJ fogged, that image of the people who are holding you back, there's a lot of negative peer pressure out there, and a lot of intense dynamics that impact our capacity to follow through on our habits. And so, Deborah, I appreciate that connection. I think people in neutral spaces like this are actually really important. I think it's also critical to think about what are the, in this time, especially in this virtual world, it's even more complicated. So even if it's just one person, it takes courage to ask, but you could say, hey, I'm working on this thing. Would you be open to being my accountability buddy? It takes, just stepping a little bit out there, but most people are really happy to support, especially in communities like this, where you have a common goal of wanting to better yourself and wanting to do better. There have been times where literally I've only had one person that's holding up that step for the next section. And friends and family can be really challenging when we're trying to better ourselves. And I talk about this a lot with different groups that I support. Misery loves company, and that's a statement for a reason. And so when people do not support your growth and they see you changing, there will be resistance. And that has happened to me. It's happened to almost everybody that I know that's really up-leveled in their life. And so to remember, I always try to have compassion for those folks. And I tell myself again and again, like, hurt people. And sometimes people who are weighing me down are actually in a lot of pain themselves. And so it's my choice, though, to be clear about who I'm going to allow to impact me, right? And where I need to set boundaries. That's been a big, big area of growth in my life this past decade, is just setting clear boundaries and saying, sorry, I can't make the dinner. Like, not everybody needs to know everything, but for the people who really drain your energy and bring you down, definitely think about how you can set some boundaries with those folks. Okay. Any other questions before we close out? Thank you for sharing. I see.
There was a question from Cedar that says, what if you don't respond well to reward systems? Is there another way to encourage developing habits?
That's a great one. Yes, I also, let me see, Cedar, thank you. I've struggled with reward systems, to be honest. Sometimes they can feel like inauthentic, or I don't know. And especially if I'm developing in myself, like I can know when I'm tricking myself, you know. And so I think it's not as though it's like meant to be anything other than self accountability. And so for me, honestly, I respond more to you're right, exactly, Tim. It's like we know when we're tricking her. We're like, wait, I've developed that reward, so let me just change it or recalibrate that expectation. And so I think that for me, it's really, really being honest with myself and coming back to my vision and talking to my family. I'm more of a, I get more fueled. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the different love languages and the different types of personalities. And people who get fueled by connection and conversation don't respond as well to like extrinsic rewards. We're more connected to intrinsic rewards. And so I think it's about for me, it's always, what does integrity mean to me? And sometimes that just means I have a reminder on my desk that says like, this is for your future family. This is for your well-being, you know, just a reminder. Another thing that I do, it's not exactly a reward, but it's an accountability system, is at the end of every month and week, I do like a weekly recap. So I have this journal planner thing, and I'm sure everybody, there's so many different planners, but there's like so many different types of planners and journals and stuff like that. But I really like this one. I got it on Amazon, to be honest. It's called Just Breathe. And it is you can set some like goals and milestones at the beginning and end of each month. And I always go back, and each week too. So you can set weekly goals and monthly goals. And I just go back to them and see if I accomplish them. And I set my own internal, like for me, even just checking off to say like, I did that. To me, that's more satisfying than like a warm cookie some days. It really depends on the day. And so just remembering that it's context specific, and I'm sure there are people in the community that can speak to things that have worked for them. A lot of folks respond well to money. And so I think to that point of Jim's point, putting money in a jar every time. And that money, that's such a great example, because that speaks to values, right? If family is a big value, then thinking about what would be the thing that I could do for others that would be a visible reminder of what I'm taking away every time I have that bad habit. That's great. Thank you. That's really awesome. I love that idea, Jim. Thank you for sharing. That's right, Kathy, exactly. So you don't want, we want to be careful to have patience and grace with ourselves, because this is a learning process. And so anytime like we get critical with ourselves or start judging ourselves or saying, man, I didn't do that thing, and so now it's taking me away from accomplishing my goals, then definitely that's a time to recalibrate and to say, maybe this isn't the habit I should be working on, you know? So you might get 7 days in and say, I tried to take on too much too fast, and so let me go back, right? Awesome. I see that one person has filled out the feedback form. Thank you so much. I'm going to put it in the chat box so that we can make sure everybody has a chance to fill out the feedback form before we officially close out. Let me make sure. Helping other people is generally more motivating than helping yourself. Yeah, that's right. I went through a period where I was raising money for a nonprofit that I was giving back to. So every time I accomplished this goal, I just put money in that thing, and that really helped me. It was like the counter to the habit that I was developing in terms of something like that versus buying yourself a new sofa or desk or something. Like that doesn't work for everybody. So it really has to be connected to something that's really important to you, right? Okay. I never lose. I either win or I learn. Yes, that's one of my favorite quotes, Andrew. Thank you for sharing. I love that framing, Jim. That is so powerful, because it really is. This process is about learning, and it just, there's no right way to do this. There's only your way. And I hope that today, with the tools that were shared, that we feel like you're more equipped to take on and to recalibrate and to set priorities, and to always remember, these times are so unprecedented, and this is not a typical goal setting prioritization time. This is like, for some of us, it's just survival. And it's like, if I can get out of my bed before 8 o'clock and get dressed and take a shower and have something done, that's a big, tiny habit to work on, right? For some people that are navigating also just the layers of mental illness that are at play in our country, like there's so many layers that are impacting our capacity to accomplish our goals and develop really strong habits right now. And so remembering to really zoom in on the tiny habit first, to remember that there are small things you can do. And it's not about doing the big thing, but it's about getting closer to the mountain peak as we climb it, right? So I hope that this session was helpful for you all. We're going to close with any just affirmations, appreciations for each other, and any intentions that you have. Like, I intend to complete this and start working on a tiny habit on June 1st, or I intend to reach out to someone in this group to be my accountability buddy, or I intend to blank, blank, or blank, right? That's right, Anna, exactly. We need support, and I agree. I am so thankful for my dog, because going on our family walks is such a saving grace, and there's no way that she could stop me, but like, it's for her health and well-being. Absolutely. Thank you so much.